Right, Dave. Top and bottom floats. How did it all start with your floats?
Well, as you can imagine, back in 2011, when I finally decided this was the direction I wanted to go, and I wanted to create a brand that was all about me, if you like, all about what I did, about the rivers and the passion of the rivers. So the original lineup of floats, it included things like your insert peacocks and straight peacocks and avens, and then stick floats. Obviously, it started with these. You know, now that's 12, 13 years. How many years ago? 13 years ago. It started with these, and the lovely thing about these floats is they've stood the test of time. You know, everybody, there's loads of people still buy these, and really the story behind this float is that stem is a 1.4 millimeter, and that stem, we all stole that idea really from the John Allerton floats previous to that. John Allerton, I think, was the first person to replace cane with alloy wire, if you like, or alloy. And all that does, see, that float's very light. The whole thing is very light about that float. So, you know, like a cane float, if you imagine that when that shotted out and it's flowing this way, right, as that's going through the water, the whole thing just goes like that.
Yeah.
They're not designed for casting long distances. The distance is all governed by the shot rather than the float. There's no weight in the float as such. Right, so we did the shoulder version, this one. I loved it. I mean, they're beautiful, delicate floats for slow-moving rivers. You know, I mean, you could argue that pole fishing has just taken up a lot of it, but there's certain days when you get a nice bit of flow on, close in, you know, 13-foot rod, 12-foot rod.
Just fishing it off the end of the rod.
Yeah, you know, and again, general rule of thumb, if you use a number 4 shot or a number 6 shot per foot of depth, that's not far away. We always used to say a number 4 was the way. Now, if you break all that down into sixes, eventually you'd work it out. How many sixes does it take? You know, if you worked out it's 6 foot deep, in slow water, number 6 is about right. In a water it's a bit more pacey, number 4 would be right.
Yeah.
Now, when you get pace, you see the lovely thing about thin tips like this, they look fantastic in a tackle shop or in here. It's great to have a thin tip, but when it's pacey and you're running a long way down the swim, you can't see it.
No.
Right, so that's why we start to use exactly the same bases, same stems, but a thicker top, a dome top. So you got the visibility. You imagine that as opposed to that.
Yeah.
When you're running that 20, 30 yards down the swim, you can't see that.
No. So that's got nothing to, that shoulder's nothing to do with getting below the flow or anything like that. It's solely to give you that thinner tip.
It gives you the thinner tip. It is nice just to hold back slightly, but you can't do a lot with it. You can slow it down. I mean, you know, you'd use on that probably 1.5 mil silicone. A real thin piece.
Yeah.
Right? Just a tiny little piece of silicone. Right, and then obviously you're using the shoulder itself then, so you're actually easing it down, and you can slow it down a little bit. Right, you can slow it and run it. So when you're running it off the reel, you can actually ease the line down this way. If you're feeding it down, you're not watching your reel, you're watching the float. But you can see everything you do with your line. That's why it's good to use a good supple line as well. You're feeling your line, you're easing it down. You can run it a bit quicker, so you can run it at the speed of the current. So everything you do, if you stop that completely, eventually it's going to do that. So you're lifting your bait off the bottom and so on. You know, you might fish off the bottom. You know, if you start to get more bites when you do that, it might well be the fish are 2 or 3 foot off the bottom. So you know, you need to experiment. But they're great. I mean they run from 2 number 4 up to 14 number 4. And there'll always be a place in my box for this sort of float, you know.
Definitely.
I mean, we used to fish places like Twyford Farm on the Avon lot, and they were brilliant for that sort of fishing because rod ends, there's lots of cover down the inside. Now you can't fish a pole like that properly because you're very sticking sections on. If you're fishing just the end of the rod top and it's moving, a stick float will often work better than a pole rig. You know. So
it just looks like it wants to go under, doesn't it?
Yeah, I just had 2 bites.
I was going to say, I was there with you then. Brilliant.
There you go.
Great stuff.